Many words have been written and spoken about chapter 28 of Ezekiel's prophecy. The reason is that it is quite a difficult passage to interpret, and it lends itself to mysterious and fabulous interpretations. But a clear-headed examination of what Ezekiel really says shows that there's no mystery. Let's look at the first 5 verses of the chapter. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, say to the Prince of Tyre, Thus says the Lord God, because your heart is lifted up, and you say, I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods, in the midst of the seas, yet you are a man, and not a god, though you set your heart as the heart of a god. It's important to note that in the NKJV and some other Bible versions, the oracle from God is set in poetic format. We would expect then that the ideas expressed will be in very figurative, poetic language. The figurative language has led to some very fanciful interpretations by many commentators. So, Ezekiel has been given a message to give to a person called the Prince of Tyre. Is it only to that man who ruled Tyre and to his nation in Ezekiel's time? Or is it about a mighty angel that rebelled against God in heaven and was exiled to the earth and given the name the devil or Satan? Or is it on the surface about a king who becomes, on closer examination, a symbol for the rebellious, satanic devil angel? It's clear to me, and I hope it will be clear to you, that A is the answer, and that B and C are incorrect. First, it should be said that most commentators bring Satan, the devil, or Lucifer into their comments, but none of these names appears anywhere in this chapter, nor anywhere in Ezekiel's prophecy. Let's examine a little more closely the first 5 verses. In verse 2, the Prince of Tyre is accused of claiming to be a god because he sits in the midst of the seas. This is an obvious reference to the coastal and island city of Tyre, which in the ancient mythology of the Tyrians rose out of the sea as the home of the god Melkart. In verses 2 and 3, his identity as a man is set beyond doubt. You are a man. And he's compared with the man Daniel, a comparison that would lose its point if a mighty angel was said to be wiser than Daniel. In verses 4 and 5, the emphasis is on the riches that the king possessed, riches of gold and silver that were gained by trade. This fits the great trading nation of Tyre, but makes no sense if applied to an angel, even a wicked one. In fact, the whole idea of an angel that rebelled in heaven is not found in the Bible. It's a myth based on the traditions of men. Jesus taught that the angels do God's will, as shown in this verse from the Lord's Prayer. The obedient service of angels is taught also in Psalm 103. God's angels are his ministers who do what pleases him. And the New Testament book of Hebrews teaches that all the angels are ministering spirits working with men and women who are striving towards salvation. There's not a hint of rebellion among the immortal angels. No, Ezekiel 28 is not a message to an angel, it's a message to the earthly kingdom of Tyre, just as the chapters around it are about earthly kingdoms, addressed in most cases to the king of each kingdom: Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistia, Sidon, and Egypt. And Tyre, the earthly kingdom, appears in Bible prophecies written by other inspired prophets. Isaiah chapter 23, Jeremiah chapter 27, Joel in chapter 3, Amos in chapter 1, and Zechariah in chapter 9. All of these are about the nation of Tyre, with no mention of a mythical angel called Satan or the devil. The verses 6 to 10 of Ezekiel 28 strengthen my belief that the message is to a human, the king of Tyre and his people. Again, there's no mention of angels. Would alien nations attack an angel? It says there, I will bring strangers against you, the most terrible of nations. Would swords be any use as weapons against an angel? They shall draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom, and you shall die the death of the slain. Angels don't die, but men and women do, and history details the slaying of many Tyrians by enemies such as Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great. Here it is again. Ezekiel is talking to a man. The words shall be are supplied by the translators, but they could correctly have said, you are a man. And the certain death of the king of Tyre is stressed again. So he's not an eternally living angel. By dipping into history, we see that when the kingdom of Israel was at its greatest extent and glory, Tyre was ruled by a king called Hiram I. King David ruled over the 12 tribes of Israel from 1003 BC until 970 BC, and Solomon followed him, ruling from 970 to 930 BC. And Hiram I ruled Tyre from 980 to 947 BC. So Hiram's reign overlapped the reigns of David and Solomon for 33 years, quite long enough for him to become thoroughly acquainted with these two neighbouring kings. The Bible states that Hiram had a great affection for David and provided materials and craftsmen for the construction of David's palace. When Solomon became king, Hiram repeated that generosity and helped build the magnificent Temple of Solomon. It's even possible that Hiram became a fellow worshipper with Solomon of the God of Israel. Most probably he visited many times as a worshipper at this temple. Notice what Hiram said about Solomon. Blessed be the Lord, for he has given David a wise son over this great people. Hiram used the special name of Israel's God, Yahweh. Did Hiram accept Israel's God as the only true God? However, by the time Ezekiel gave his prophecies around 586 BC, Hiram I had been dead some 360 years, and Tyre was now ruled by Ethbaal II. Israel had fallen on bad times. The great kingdom of Israel had split into two kingdoms, 10 tribes in the north, who went into captivity in 721 BC, 2 tribes in the south around Jerusalem. This 2-tribe kingdom went into captivity in 586, and Ezekiel was from this latter kingdom. All his prophecies were written while he was in exile in Babylon. Judging by the content and tone of Ezekiel's message to the king of Tyre, Tyre had incurred the wrath of God by perverting the worship system that had been modelled on that of Israel in the time of Hiram I. With this historical background in mind, let's look at those phrases in Ezekiel 28 verses 12 to 16 that seem to point to an evil angel target of God's condemnation. Ezekiel 28:13, you were in Eden, the garden of God. The people of Tyre under Hiram I and probably under later kings were associates of and constant visitors to God's people of Israel. The promised land is called a land flowing with milk and honey, and the glory of all lands in Ezekiel 20 verse 6. And it's called a land for which God cares in Deuteronomy 10 verse 12. Even if the promised land was not the location of the original Garden of Eden in which Adam and Eve lived at first, it seems to have taken over from Eden as a special fertile place blessed by God, a new Garden of Delights. And Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, is extra special in the eyes of God. In 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 36, God is quoted as saying, "My servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself, to put my name there." So Jerusalem and its surrounds can truly be called the Garden of God, because God's name is there. You were the anointed cherub who covers. The difficulty with this verse is that the term cherub in Ezekiel and other books of the Old Testament is a symbolic term standing for angel. So was the king of Tyre an angel? Notice, however, that the word were is enclosed in square brackets to signal that this has been added by the translators. It's not there in the original manuscript. Other versions of the Bible, particularly the Revised Version and the Net Bible, show that Tyre was with the anointed cherub. I placed you there with an anointed guardian cherub. This should remind us of Exodus 23 verse 20, where God appointed a special angel to lead and guard the Israelites through the wilderness and into the promised land. "Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared." This difficult verse we've been considering indicates that the protection given by the special guardian angel to the Israelites was also extended to their allies, the nation of Tyre. The evidence of this angel's presence was the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day that hovered over the place of worship, the tabernacle in the wilderness. The Israelites in the camp around it were protected and guided by this guardian angel. Isaiah wrote of this protection in chapter 63 verse 9. "In all their affliction God was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bore them, and carried them all the days of old." When Solomon dedicated his new temple in Jerusalem, the cloud filled it to show that God was with his people still, and with whoever shared worship with the Israelites. Now verse 14. "You were on the holy mountain of God." Where is this holy mountain? Is it in heaven, as the abode of God and his angels, or is it on earth? This passage in Isaiah 56 is very relevant, as it speaks about non-Jews like the Tyrians who dedicate themselves to the worship of the Jewish God. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to the Lord to serve him, even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. There's our answer. God's holy mountain is the place where worship of God takes place on earth, at the temple in Jerusalem, where the worshippers offer sacrifices on its altar. Ezekiel also makes it clear where the holy mountain is. It's the mountain height of Israel. And Isaiah is even more specific. The holy mountain is Jerusalem. And that's surely a place on earth to which God's people will return from among the nations. "You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones." Some people think this is referring to the devil or Satan presiding over the torments of the wicked in hellfire. But is it really? The fiery stones phrase is referring to inhabitants of the promised land. How come? Well, fiery stones can refer to gemstones. The beauty of gemstones is seen in the way they flash forth the light that falls on them, coloured by the essential nature of each gemstone. The high priest, who led the worship at the temple, wore a breastplate studded with 12 gemstones. These gemstones would have flashed brilliantly as the high priest entered the most holy room of the temple, in which the glory of God shone as a blinding light. Each gemstone represented a tribe of Israel, so he carried on his heart responsibility for all the people of his nation. Are the fiery stones really about the supposed fiery torments of hell? Here's my answer. No, it's not about Satan presiding in hellfire. It's about the close association and friendship between the Tyrians and Israelites in the time of Hiram I and some time after. Then in verse 15, some people think there's a reference to a sinning angel who was originally perfect. Tyre under Hiram I was greatly approved of by God, and he blessed it in many ways. But what sins did it become guilty of? Firstly, because Tyre has said against Jerusalem, "Aha, she is broken who was the gateway of the people. Now she is turned over to me. I shall be filled. She is laid waste. Therefore thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, Tyre." This prophecy was delivered in 586 BC, probably after Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. Note the words, she, that is Jerusalem, is laid waste. The laying waste has already taken place when Ezekiel delivers this prophecy. So the Tyrians were planning to take over Jerusalem after Israel's destruction. The second reason why God condemns Tyre is that Tyre is now guilty of setting up a god king as a rival to the God of Israel. Because your heart is lifted up and you say, I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods, in the midst of the seas, yet you are a man and not a god. The Prince of Tyre is a man, not a god as he thought. You sinned, so I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub drove you out from the midst of the stones of fire. God's appointed angel would no longer treat Tyre as if it was a part of God's people of Israel, welcomed on the mountain of God at Jerusalem. Unfortunately, in 586 BC, the anointed cherub also banished the remaining two-tribe kingdom of Israel from the promised land because of their wickedness. Jerusalem was to lie desolate for 70 years before the Jews would be allowed to return to the mountain of God. Ezekiel chapters 26 to 28 are all about the Jewish people and Tyre's relationship with them. There's no justification for the mistaken belief that Tyre is simply a metaphor for a rebellious angel that fell from heaven.